Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Back for another 5 years, the Narendra Modi government is now going to look to finish all of its incomplete agenda from the last 5 years, and important for them among that is the concept of one nation, one election. To discuss that, in fact, the Prime Minister has called a meeting of the presidents of all parties this evening, and this has been a contentious issue, which is what we are going to examine today in this episode of our new daily show, Government Matters, with me, Ruhi Tiwari. To talk to us, we have with us Sania Dhingra, who's been following the Election Commission very, very closely and tracking all matters related to it. Sania, to begin with, we've heard a lot about this one nation, one election and how this means that simultaneously elections should be held to the Lok Sabha and Assembly polls. But just to break it down for us a little bit, if you can explain what this really entails, what it really means.
So very simply put, it means that when a citizen goes out to vote, she votes for all the three tiers of government simultaneously, which is the Lok Sabha, the State Assembly, as well as the municipal bodies and the Panchayat. But because for the Panchayat elections and the municipal body elections are conducted by state election commissions instead of the Central Election Commission, that for the present discourse is kept out, and what we are talking about is having elections to the Lok Sabha and to the State Assembly simultaneously.
Right. So what kind of amendments would it require? Because we've heard the opposition talk about how not just is it a politically sensitive issue, but it requires constitutional amendments as well, or whatever legal amendments. So what does it require?
Right. So there are actually several constitutional amendments that this would require. Election Commission, in fact, in 2017, I believe, said that there would be at least 5 constitutional amendments that would be required, and for that we know that the government would need to pass the amendments with a 2/3 majority in both houses of Parliament, as well as get the amendments ratified by correct, and by 50% of the states as well.
Correct.
So now, what are some of these amendments? According to the Representation of People's Act, for instance, an assembly can be dissolved only 6 months prior to its due date of dissolution. Now, in order to change that, an amendment would be required to the RP Act and, by extension, Article 83 of the Constitution, which deals with the RP Act. So that would be required in the first place in order to ensure that all the elections are synchronized in the first place, right? For example, Haryana may have elections in December or November. So if you wanted to have them in May, say alongside the Lok Sabha elections that just took place, you would have to amend the constitution to ensure that the Haryana Assembly can be dissolved earlier. So that is one of the amendments. Another thing very crucial to this debate is about the no confidence motion. What happens if there's a no confidence motion? So there was a report that the Law Commission submitted last year on this issue, in which even the Law Commission said that this is something desirable but would need constitutional amendments. To that, they said that if there is a no confidence motion, it can be passed only if there is simultaneously a confidence motion in favor of another government.
Okay.
And
so it requires changing that as well, because we've had a different rule for no confidence motions so far.
Correct. So unless now we have an alternative government, we can't have a no confidence motion, is what the Law Commission said. So these are some of the key amendments that would be required, and of course we would, the government would need to pass them in both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, as I mentioned, which could be a little hard considering the
numbers in the Rajya Sabha. Yes. So just to understand, Sania, suppose we go through with this one nation, one election concept, and for some reason the government in the center falls and fresh elections have to be called. So then fresh elections have to be called to all the states as well. How does it work then? According to, again, what the Law Commission report said, that there cannot be any midterm polls. So if there is a no confidence motion, then there has to be a new government that is elected, and that will be elected only for the remaining period, right? So if, for example, after 2.5 years of being in power, a government falls, so a new government has to be elected right then, and it will be elected not for another 5 years of its term, but another 2.5 years, so that the next round of elections can remain synchronized. And this applies to state governments as well,
yes,
similar rule?
Yes.
Sure. So now,
this is although just a suggestion by the Law Commission.
It's a proposal, yes. So what has been the Election Commission stand? Because that's the most crucial body when it comes to conducting elections.
Correct. So as I mentioned, the Election Commission said that there would be constitutional amendments required. However, in principle, even when we spoke to the CEC last year, he said that it's something that is desirable, and this is not just the current CEC. we have had about 2 or 3 chief election commissioners who have said that this is in principle something desirable, but only after the legal amendments are made.
Right. So we've talked about the technicalities, Sania, what does it entail, what it would require, but just to explain, why is it desirable? What is the logic for those pushing for simultaneous polls?
So, of course, among those pushing for simultaneous polls is the BJP, and the Prime Minister has really thrown his weight behind this idea since the last 2-3 years. But you know, a paper published by Niti Aayog in 2017, I think, actually provides a great detail of insight into this entire concept. So there are 2 or 3 key things that the paper and other sort of proponents of this idea say. One is that elections take place in the country rather frequently. For example, in December we had assembly elections in about 5 states. Then we went into Lok Sabha polls. Now we are again looking at another round of state assembly elections. So in fact, according to the Niti Aayog, in the last 30 years there has not been a single year wherein elections have not taken place in the country. Now with elections, what happens is the model code of conduct is imposed. Now when the model code of conduct is imposed, we know that the government goes on a standby mode. There is no policy making that happens. There's no, basically all the governance and development related work comes to a standstill. So, and for a period of 1, 2, 3 months. So they say that sort of prevents the government from having some degree of continuity, and that is one of the main reasons why it's important to have synchronized elections at once.
Also the financial aspect.
Correct. And I was coming to the financial aspect. This is something that the Election Commission spoke very extensively about. For example, in 2014 elections, the government had spent about rupees 4,000 crores on conducting the elections. And another 200 to 300 crores are spent per state assembly election. The Election Commission had come up with this estimate that if all elections are to be conducted together, then the entire exercise can be wound up in, say, 4,500 crore rupees.
Okay.
So that they say will be substantially saving the money of the government of India. So that is another reason. But you know, coming back, since this is such a polarizing issue, to every argument for this concept, there's an argument against it. So, for example, when I spoke about the model code of conduct, what the opposition is arguing is that on one hand, you're not able to finish the Lok Sabha elections in a single day or in 1 phase or 2 phases. You have an election that's spanned.
7-phase election this time.
Exactly. So, if that is the, if you're not able to wind up the one single election for the entire country in, say, 2 or 3 phases, how do you propose that you will be able to conduct the elections for the state assemblies as well as Lok Sabha together and wind it up in a decent period of time? So it's actually a very, very polarizing debate, and there are no clear answers.
Right. In fact, the opposition has been very fairly vociferously opposed to it. Today, there are opposition parties which have said they will not attend, and Mamata Banerjee has said she will not. Chandrababu Naidu has said he will not. TRS has said, but they are also demanding, they have certain demands. They're demanding there should be a white paper, there should be more extensive discussions. So what have been the opposition's key demands?
So as you mentioned, it was Mamata Banerjee who said there should be a white paper circulated. So I think the fear is, and that's what the opposition parties have been saying, that the logistical arguments aside, they see this as a threat to federalism, the spirit of federalism in India, because they say that this would give an edge to national parties, because when according to some studies that they have been quoting, when a voter goes out to vote for 2 elections simultaneously, there's a very high probability that she would vote for the same party in both elections. Right. So this will give an edge perhaps to the national parties to allow them to marginalize local issues, state issues, regional issues, and sort of make the election more presidential in the way its discourses.
Right. In fact, this is an obvious question, but there is no absolute way to determine this. It's not just about giving an edge to national parties, it's also about how the voter pattern and behavior would change even with respect to two national parties. For instance, in the state assembly elections, the Congress won Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, but BJP ended up winning, in fact sweeping all these three states in the Lok Sabha elections. So is that, finally just to ask you this last question, is that also, besides the fact that regional versus national, does it also change voter pattern, or does it also lead to confusion about what the voter pattern might be when this happens?
No, so as I mentioned, it's even if it's not about national versus regional issues, the voter tends to vote. This is what some studies say, that this is what that voters tend to vote for the same party if they're going to simultaneously vote in an election. So, for example, if Rajasthan and Lok Sabha elections took place at the same time, we are not quite sure if the citizen would have actually voted for the Congress in the state election and assembly election and voted for the BJP at the same time in the Lok Sabha election. So what the worry is that this would allow the national parties, particularly the BJP, to subsume all the regional issues and make the voter who's going to vote for the PM vote for the BJP,
state elections in any case.
The BJP in the state elections as well. So that is another fear.
Right. Well, polarizing, controversial issue, but the BJP will try to push through with it. As I said, it's as Sania also mentioned, in fact, it's a pet agenda for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Let's see how they're able to go forward with this, given the opposition to it. Sania, thank you so much for throwing light on the issue, and thank you so much for watching Government Matters.